Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. I am very pleased to be joined by a multiple time guest of this show, Jay Olshonsky. Started a new venture roughly a year ago. We're going to talk about that, talk about commercial real estate industry. We're going to talk about some AI and just have a fun conversation to catch up with. So, Jay, thanks so much for joining me again on the show.
Well, thanks, Chad. It's great to be back with you again. And since we've talked before over the last year, there's been a lot of change. As you're well aware of, I am the former chairman, president, and CEO of NAI Global now, and that's about a year ago that I stepped down from that role. And I immediately started a consulting practice in a company that is called 42 Plus LLC. And everyone always asks me, so I'll just tell you, what does the 42 stand for? And I have been in the commercial real estate business and the real estate business for now 43 years, since it's been a year since I set that up. So when I set it up, I named the company 42 Plus LLC. It sounded like a good ring to it. And it's an advisory company, a consulting company, really helping business leaders, both residentially, commercially, and to help them on where things are going, and really fighting the number one thing that I see in all real estate, especially commercial real estate, is either individuals or firms stagnate. Not so much that they're bad, not so much that they're doing anything wrong, but they're kind of not moving backwards, they're not moving forwards, and they don't really know how to do that. So that's what 42 Plus and myself specializes.
I knew as soon as I saw the name that that's what it was because I think
Okay.
the first time that we did an interview, you were just around 40 years. I think you were approaching 40 years. And then throughout the years, I think there was 41. And I think we
Yep.
even talked when it was just around 42. So I knew right away as I know Jay's over 40 years in the business. So that's got
Exactly.
to be a nod to that. So, well, congrats on setting that up. I'd be very interested in exploring what you're doing on more of a day-to-day basis and then just what you're seeing. And let's perhaps kick it off with AI because I think AI is probably
Sure.
the topic that it's polarizing actually because some people are getting so sick of hearing about AI that it's
Right.
almost becoming you're just getting inundated with it all the time. It's just AI everything. And I think that there's some people that are saying, okay, enough. We got it. We've integrated the basics, or perhaps they don't even want to do anything of it. And then there's others that are saying, well, yeah, no, we understand that the competition is doing this. We need to step up. So they're trying to absorb everything that they can. So I really feel it's in one of those two camps right now is people are either getting annoyed with it or they're saying, I want to learn everything I can about it. Where
Yeah.
is that
So
a fair assessment?
no, no, no. I think that you're 100% correct. And so I fall in the camp that real estate and businesses and are always evolving and always changing. And certainly artificial intelligence or AI is by far the newest aspect of change to, let's say, the world. It's not just the business world, it's to the world and how things are done, how people operate, where it's going, even the physical build space of it, which could 100% apply to industrial real estate, but exists in power, water, land, buildings, and the amount of money that's being spent by mainly some of the very largest organizations in technology towards artificial intelligence is mind-boggling. I mean, I've heard some numbers that there's going to be as much money spent by the seven largest tech companies in the world as the whole United States consumer will spend on just going to eat, going to the grocery store, going on vacation. Which when you start thinking about that, either someone's really, really right or someone's going to take a bath. Now, the other side to that is it absolutely, you can say the tech business did this, back in the early 2000s when we had the technology bubble. Not a lot of companies went out of business because of the technology bubble, but many of the rock bed technology companies today made it through that bubble. And even some of the largest companies have said there probably will be a bubble. When that'll happen, no one knows. But in a certain regard, there'll be some winners and losers that come out of that bubble. So with all that said, I kind of boil it down to who needs to pay attention to this. Back to your point, is there too much? Is there, not enough? And so I'm taking the approach that you absolutely have to pay attention to artificial intelligence. Do you need to be 100% an expert in artificial intelligence? No. Do you need to maybe hire people or outsource to people that can do certain things in that? Yes, you do. And some of these things, and so what I've done is I am paying a lot more attention to it, but I am not trying to be the expert in artificial intelligence. So I've teamed up with a gentleman by the name of Phil Stringer, and Phil is the expert in residential artificial intelligence, training the largest asset class of brokers how to use artificial intelligence in the residential space. And he's done a tremendous job doing that. He speaks at many events all the time. So what Phil and I are doing is I'm taking the approach, look, I know commercial real estate. I don't know artificial intelligence, but let's put you as, meaning Phil, as the person that will train people, will educate them. And then you can go as deep, back to your point. If someone wants to go deep, they can hire Phil's company to do everything for them. If someone wants to go narrow, they can go on to an annualized basis where they can just basically get information from Phil's company and how it applies to commercial real estate and how it applies to business, because the applications are way beyond real estate in the different aspects of where it's going. So this is a question I get all the time. Is it going to replace brokers? Is it going to replace service providers? Is it going to replace lawyers? Is it going to replace people? That question is probably not, because people will adapt to it and use it on behalf of their customers and their clients. Plus, anytime you have a physical aspect of a house, an office, an industrial building, a tenant, or a buyer or a seller, you still have to be able to communicate with them and sometimes actually physically show property, physically, look at different things. But can it save you time? 100%. Could it save a buyer time? 100%. Could it save, a seller time? 100%. Could it give the seller, the buyer, I don't care what real estate it is, the same information that you have today or that I have based on my 42 years? It'll probably be able to give them a lot of that information. But then, just like anything else, it's a question of how is it used in the future. And that's what I'm really helping companies and individuals with, to say, okay, you can't, can it save you 10 hours a week? If it does, then use it. If it's going to occupy 20 hours a week of your time, then you have to start thinking about, should I, just like any tech. Now, I'll also leave it with this, is that I guess about 10 years ago, I met with somebody out in California who was older than me at the time. He was actually close to 80. And he said, just about every 10 years, something comes along to real estate that is going to be the end all be all, completely change it. And, some of it does, but we still kind of revert back to what we've done in the past. Now, that's my point on stagnation, that I'm not sure you'll be able to operate like we did 10 or 5 or even especially 20 years ago. And you've heard me say this before. 80% of real estate agents, especially commercial real estate agents, don't get it. They're not adapting. They're not changing. They don't have any market share. They think relationship wins 100% of the time, which relationship does win if you have all the other modern aspects that goes along with that. I still break the real estate business down, especially commercial. 10% of the real estate service providers are wonderful, off the charts, workaholics, adopt all the new tools, use everything they can to be better or best. They're very narrow focused. They're generally just industrial investment sales, or they're just tenant rep, and they're great. And they're using AI to their full advantage already. And then 10% of the commercial real estate brokers want to be like that 10%. And the rest of them are trying to figure out where are they and what are they doing and how can they survive. Plus, Chad, you know this, we have an aging problem in all real estate. The average age, whether in SIOR or CCIM or even just a commercial real estate, is approaching 60 years old. So there's a whole shifting of what I call the baby boomers to, I'll nicely say to, because I'm a baby boomer and I'm not retired because I'm still working, but they're shifting towards what's next. And that could be full retirement, that could be consulting like I'm doing and advising, that could be to ownership, that could be to not changing at all. Being, some of the most productive commercial real estate people are 65, 75. I even know a 95-year-old. I'd love to make the kind of money this 95-year-old commercial real estate broker makes. And he goes in every day and he's in great shape. God willing, he can keep doing it. And he makes more money than I would say 90% of the people I know in commercial real estate. So it really is an exciting time to be in, the commercial real estate business in particular.
It is. And I hope if anyone's listening to this and they're considering getting into the industry, that they're inspired by that, because there is a big shift about to happen. Let's talk about the commercial real estate landscape right now in terms
Yeah.
of brokerage, because this trend has accelerated as of recently, but call it 40 years ago when you first started, there were no big conglomerates. That's been like a CBRE has gone through and bought a lot of companies, and they've expanded. And you see that now with like JLL or perhaps some of the other ones. They've really grown through expansion and adding other divisions. And now you have the scenario where you have these big, large companies like a Fortune 500 company like CBRE, which has considerable market share across the world, and they're in major markets and they're major players. Whereas you might have a small boutique shop in an office where it's five guys. What do you see? Does this accelerate? Do we see it get to the point where it is all just big players and the small guys have much more difficulty trying to compete? And I guess wraparound question on that, does AI help level that playing field? Does that perhaps go the other way where there isn't as much reliance on these big brokerages anymore? Open question, but just love to hear your.
Yeah, well, I think you're going to have, well, let's go back a little history. If you go back, which would be the 80s, you really didn't have the connectivity through computers to allow you to do some of the things that we're now doing today. Now, keep in mind, and everyone hates this when I say this, but you have to give him credit. The only technology company that was really started in the 80s that is now the biggest commercial real estate data company in the world was CoStar. And CoStar started in the 80s off of IBM DOS machines, which very few people had. And then through the years has grown and grown and grown, diversified, bought businesses, protected their rights, when people stole their information, and still sue people. And they should, when people are steal. If someone steals your information, I expect you to sue them or come up with stuff. But so, and then, you really had other technology companies come along, throughout that time period, really accelerating with the iPhone. So when you start really getting the history lesson, when you start getting the mobility and the connectivity that the internet and the iPhone gave people, real estate tech took off. And, today there's still some very large players, that there are consolidating. Lightbox is consolidating a whole bunch of different real estate tech. And all of these different techs are now available to anyone that wants to pay for them. And so in a certain regard, yes, the CBREs, the JLLs, the Cushmans, the Colliers, the Newmarks, the big public companies, got bigger. Savills got bigger. They all got bigger, but they got bigger through acquisition. They got bigger by buying boutiques. They got bigger by buying, people, and now the biggest ones are buying more diversified businesses. So you almost have to break down, are they in the brokerage and transactional business? Yes, they are. But that's a different business than being in the development or being in the facilities management to being in those. So some of these big companies have actually gotten really big, and yes, they still have dominant share, but you have to still remember that only 70%, round numbers, could be 60, could be 65, 70, of properties are institutionally owned. So it does allow a lot of room for boutiques and individuals to compete in smaller firms because, you use your market. I would bet it's probably not 70% institutionally owned, all of the real estate in the market.
Mm-hmm.
So in a certain regard, it's how do you compete? The other thing is when you have the same information available to everyone, and now with artificial intelligence, that you can do some of the things that you couldn't have done even 3 years or 5 years ago, it might actually be a time where, yes, the individual broker at CB or JLL has the same stuff available, but it might actually be easier for an independent firm like an NAI member or like a SVN member or even, Lee and Associates, some of the smaller firms, to actually compete because the information flow is available to anyone that wants to use it or anyone that wants to pay for it or get access to it. So it does get back to the service side of the business is actually more important than well, I'm at the big company, so you should hire me just because we're big. That will happen on occasion. It will definitely happen. But at the same regard, everyone now, I think it's leveled the playing field a little bit. And so it makes it, I think it might even be easier to be an individual or a boutique firm now than it's ever been, because in a certain regard, I can give you an example. I set up a new business a year ago, and the things that I was able to do to set up my new business, I couldn't have done even in my old business because they didn't exist. Whether it was accounting, whether it was bill pay, invoicing, whether it was website development, whether it was I didn't hire a whole bunch of people to do that for me. There are plenty of great companies that you can use, and commercial real estate people and brokers can do that too. Now, I think the biggest threat to commercial real estate is that the owners and the users of the properties can do some of these same things. So in a certain regard, if like, I'll give you an example. If let's say I came to your hometown and said, I'd like to buy a building. I don't know anything about your area. You advise me. But in a certain regard, I probably can get all the information on your market from 10 different sources, I would think. And if I subscribe to CoStar, I can get whatever they have. Let's not debate accuracy, because in a certain regard, none of them are 100% accurate. But I can get that. But there's one thing that I can't get. You will tell me that's the wrong side or the right side of the street to be on, because you live there, you grew up there, you breathe it, you eat it, you sleep it, in a certain regard. So, that to me will never change, because at some level, yes, I can get to all the information. I can get all the reports. I can do all my own stuff. I can have AI analyze all. I can do all that, but I still can't replace, like, you live there, you work there, so I think but again, that's a big deal. But I might be able to, once I get all the information and once I get your expertise on the local area, I think I might be able to lease the building on my own, because the process of leasing it in a certain regard is about exposing it to the marketplace and exposing it to the brokerage community, exposing it to the tenant base. I might be able to be the GC on the construction once I get to know all the contractors and stuff. I might be able to finance it from somewhere else. So in a certain regard, those are some of the changes that I think about when, I always say to people, don't go into a pitch and think the owner doesn't know as much as you, because sometimes the owner knows more than you do, because they're doing the same thing. Keep in mind, CoStar's biggest subscribers over the last 5 years have been owners and users of real estate, not brokers.
Hmm.
And they're not paying for it to just not use it. They're using the information.
Yeah, there's definitely a big shift coming, and that will be. I just got to extend this here for some reason. It's not. Okay, that should be good.
Yeah.
Uh, there's definitely a big shift coming, and I want to go back to the residential side that
Yeah.
Bill's working on, and one thing that I've always really appreciated about the residential side of the business is that they've historically been much ahead of the commercial side in many things, and personal branding is definitely one of them. And I also suspect that a lot of them are further ahead on AI. But on the personal branding side, they've done an excellent job of branding themselves as an expert tied to a company or a brokerage, but it's still them front facing.
Right.
It's their picture, it's their branding, it's their messaging. And commercial's been very, very slow to do that. And you only need to go on to YouTube or Twitter or LinkedIn, and you could find a residential agent that specializes in your neighborhood, let alone the city or the state or province. Whereas commercial, there has been a lot of reticence to do that. Do you think that changes, or do you think?
Well, I think it's already changed the personal branding of commercial. So, I think you and I both have a common friend in Bob Knackle.
Yep.
And, Bob obviously, had his own company. He worked for Cushman and Wakefield. He worked for Jones Lang LaSalle. And he is a classic case of one of the opportunities is, and he's certainly a boutique firm,
Mhm.
right? He's not one of the nationals or global companies. But he, in a very short period of time, I'm going to say 3 years, maybe 2 years, had gone from everyone in New York knew who Bob Knackle was, everybody. But no one outside of New York really did. And he used the internet, he used tools, he used whether it was Twitter, or Instagram or things, social media, let's throw it all in that category. He also used speaking engagements. He also used networking, which are somewhat you could call old school. But he also hired a whole bunch of people to help him do that. So his personal and company brand could have never been built that way within, let's say, one of the large companies. So because they, in a certain regard, they allow some of that, but they haven't historically allowed a lot of that. So I think that creates a huge opportunity for people that have the ability to brand personally along with their companies, whether it's your own company or whether it's in even a global or national company, because in a certain regard, as long as it's done within brand compliance within the companies, there's really no downside if every time you see your name or my name and you see the company name, it is good for both, in a certain regard. Now, some of the companies will say, some of the bigger ones will say, well, we want to control the message, we want to control the brand, things like that. And that, in my mind, creates opportunity for boutiques and individuals. So, and Chad, I think you've created a brand for yourself. You keep in mind, a couple of years ago, you weren't doing these podcasts.
Mhm.
You weren't traveling around to different events. You weren't using social media to the same extent. So I can even look at you and say, you've created a personal brand within the commercial real estate business where you now know people way outside of Canada, and within different areas. And you and I could probably name 50 or 100 people, that have done that. When I think of, my friend, Ken Ashley,
Mhm.
he's with Cushman and Wakefield. He's created a whole movement within social media and within AI and within tech, to where he has different people. And you and I could keep going on. So I think personal branding is a given. And if you're not doing it going forward, in a certain regard, what's the old saying? If you don't advertise, nobody knows anything, right? So if you don't promote, you know, and I think it's Bob who says it's not about, what it's about who knows you. And I tend to agree with that. I mean, even what I'm doing with some of my own promotion is, playing along the fact that, look, I'm not the only guy out there that's run commercial real estate companies and things like that. But I'm trying to, I have a personal brand, And I had a personal brand even in my old role, as I was in a certain regard the face of my old role. And now it's my own face and my own company. So I think it's real necessary. Residential people have done a great job to it. You can say it's corny, you can say it's weird, but having pictures on signs like they have at houses, I remember those things when I drive by. If I see your picture on 25 signs, guess what? Oh, okay. Now I know that guy. So I think that will continue, and certainly AI makes all of that so easy to do some of those things. I mean, when you think of the easy things it can do for you, like create a whole social media plan where all you're really doing is cutting and pasting, or you're having someone else do it for it. So that continues. Now there's an old saying that you have to be careful about social media. I think you would agree with this. Um, if you're promoting, 1,000-foot deals as your mainstay, guess what you're going to be known as? 1,000-foot deals. If you're promoting that you sold, $100 million worth of property, you have to remember that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good. But in a certain regard, in what area or in what reference? Because there are people that sell 100 million a month, right? It's different people. So I always say to people, you have to please read what some of this stuff gets created, and make sure and give it to your spouse, or give it to your friend, or give it to a colleague, or pay someone that's 20 years old instead of our age or my age, to read it and go, will this resonate with a 25-year-old, or is this going to sound like dad, like stupid dad, saying something? So I think you have to be careful with personal branding on how you do that, and stay on your skis. Don't get too far ahead of them, from that point of view. But the direct answer to your question is, I think it's already happening. Personal branding in commercial real estate.
Yeah, and the mention.
You're seeing owners do it.
Yes.
I mean, think about it. I mean, yeah, okay. Do you know 5 years ago? Did you know who the head of Blackstone was?
No.
But you do now,
Mhm.
because he's got a video almost every week. You know what I mean? That saying what he's been up to, and I think it's very good what Jonathan Gray has done, and I think a lot of people have a lot of respect for him for and certainly they're going through some tough times with that shooter, and the tragedy within their company in New York City. But he has his own personal brand, probably bigger than Blackstone's brand, but that's okay because he's so intertwined with Blackstone. So I think you're going to start seeing other owners like that and other people do that. Certainly, if you look at politics and you look at other business leaders, they are very careful about their business brand and stuff. So it's going to absolutely continue. The whole, I once said to somebody who was, putting some stuff on Twitter that I thought was sort of weird, but then I was talking to him and he said, "But Jay, it's all true." And I said, "It's not bragging if it's true. And sometimes you might just need to say that, like if I sold all these buildings, great, if it's all true, but be careful on, what's the old saying? If you and I are broker partners and you're the head guy and I'm the junior, sure, we sold the building together, but you really sold the building. You probably, yes, so, it could be a play on words. I was happy to work with Chad, working with him on the sale of this building. So in a certain regard, be a credit giver, not a credit taker. Does that make sense?
It does. And that actually kind of extends into the next point that I had, is that you also need to be a value giver.
Yeah.
There's a lot of value taking on social media. I think that that's actually one of the things I really enjoy about it, is there's some very smart people sharing things on social media. And the three that you mentioned, Bob, Ken, Jonathan, those are all three guys that have been very, very successful in their careers, and they don't need to be on social media.
Not at all.
They could be the guys that are typical in any office. They've been there, they've got tenure, they've been there for a long time, and they don't want anything to do with social media. All three of those guys could just take a back seat and not do it. But they're all out there offering value. And I think
Right.
that is what makes them so engaging, is that you get to see behind the lens of a very successful operator, which I think is just very cool. And I think you can spread that across different generations too. I think there's still something to be said about the new broker that gets into the business and just documents what they're going through. And they're just saying, yeah, no, day one, I was drinking through a fire hose. I had no idea that the 10 hours went by in 10 minutes. I had no idea what to think. And they document it. I think people just need to, instead of that new broker going in and saying, oh, I'm just crushed $100 million deal, they're actually sharing what they're learning along the way, and vice versa. It'd be very inauthentic if Bob were to say a beginner story, because it just, everyone knows how successful Bob is. So just, I think you need to have that message resonate with who you are and where you are at that point in time. So we're gonna add something.
No, 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 go ahead.
So on the, I wanted us to go back to the AI side as well, because you mentioned Phil has been working with a lot of residential agents. And I suppose you could frame this from either a standpoint on what you see residential agents doing well, or what some of the commercial agents you've seen that have adopted AI that's worked or been efficient, that's benefited them. I love that point you made. If you're gaining 10 hours a week from AI, keep doing it. If you're spending 20 hours a week on AI, maybe reconsider it or restructure it. What have you seen brokers do, residential or commercial, that's given them that 10 hours a week?
Well, a couple things. I mean, there's some basic things that, let's say all brokers do. Could be a broker opinion and value, gathering information, getting it into a format, taking a spreadsheet. I can give you an example of something I recently did that brokers do all the time. I was sent a list in Excel, and I couldn't figure out through Excel, which I'm pretty good at, on how to sort the list. So after trying to sort it in Excel, I just copied the whole list and put it into Chat GPT and said, "Could you please sort this by this?" And within 22 seconds, because I looked, it did it. It literally did it. So now the problem was I'd already spent 30 minutes trying to do it in Excel. So there's an example. And, brokers do stuff in Excel every day.
Mhm.
Now, the other aspect is, simple things like creating any social media post, any email. Let's say you have a complicated email you need to produce. And in a certain regard, you don't really know how to, you know what you want to say conversationally, but you don't know how to get it formalized. That sounds, I know, of course, it sounds basic, but again, that's a time saver. Could you please summarize an email adding these 4 points? And it just does it. And then it proofs it, and then you can modify it and things like that. There's another time saver. Or, just trying to figure out, and this is one of my pet peeves with brokers for a long time. Just, I'm going to meet with somebody who I don't know at all, and using deep research through any of the different AI language models, just doing deep research on somebody that can give you a nuance about the meeting, or give you information, or give you something that you now have in common with them. These sort of things, I can remember, this is going to sound really old school. I can remember in the 80s going to the library to look up businesses and look up, who that company heads were. Today, so again, these are all time savers. Also, any sort of analytical work, whether you're doing a discounted cash flow or you're doing, something, there's so many new ways of doing that, that can, by you just adding basic information and saying, use this set of assumptions, and it does it for you. I can make an argument. You might not need a full-time analyst if you're good at that, or you can outsource that to someone who's good at that. So those are all time savers. I think the harder part comes in is, how much time do you spend learning? How much time do you spend testing? How much time? So I kind of go back to, I remember one of your colleagues at NAI a long time ago on AI said, well, it'll get me a list of every user in my market just by typing it in. And I said, that's wonderful. That saved you time. But now, what are you going to do with that list? And so in a certain regard, yes, it saved time to get the list, but you still have to pick the phone up or go visit or send emails or somehow contact. And to your point, giving something of value, it is wonderful at giving value from the point of view, you know, I sometimes will take 3 or 4 different market reports, just more, the vacancy is, the sales are, the comps are, and I put it into it's called Notebook LM, and you can add things into Notebook LM and say, will you search through the 3 different reports that I downloaded and give me the 10 bullet points where I don't even have to read them, and then it gives me 10 bullet points. Now, of course, I have to read it to make sure, again, it makes sense, right? But it will do that. So those are some of the time savers. I think the hardest part comes in, and one of the things Phil really works on in our training is that, you really have to figure out how much time are you going to spend on it? How will it save you time? Not so much, because if it's not saving you time, then it's just not saving you time. But I will say in my consulting practice, I use it all the time. Things like simple things. Someone said to me, I want to recruit agents, and to kind of go to work for me, a firm I'm helping, in consulting. And I don't know this area at all. So I literally went to AI and said, could you give me a list of all commercial real estate brokers within this area and sort it by, companies and name, and give me any market information you can find, like number of listings, things like that. And I did this, and it took, I don't know, a minute. I didn't read it because none of it made any sense to me, because it had like your name on it. I didn't know who you were. So then I said, look, I emailed it to my client. I said, this is unscrubbed, but just see if we need to add or delete people in. And he wrote back to me, he said, how'd you get this? And I told him I didn't. Now that's the other thing. Back to your point, value. I didn't say to him, oh, well, I said, it took me, I don't know, 10 minutes. So again, if I had to do that on my own from a time, if I had to bill him for 10 minutes versus it would have taken me hours. So even there, it's a time and money saving. So lots of things like that. And I'm just scratching the surface with, different campaigns you could do, or, the other aspect is just communication with an owner when you're leasing a property. I'm a strong believer in using, things like VTS for landlord leasing and things like that. So it's automated process. But, I think I read online, someone said, if the customer's calling for an update, you're already behind, in a certain regard. So, it can create those triggers, those reminders. It can mine, I've heard of people using AI for cold calling. I've not seen any models that do that in a way that pass what I would call the baby boomer test. I don't think a baby boomer wants to get called, would you like to sell your property? Here are the reasons why. But again, I'm not so sure a 35-year-old working at an institution would mind that. I'm not sure on that. That's jury out on something like that. And maybe that will become norm in time. But thinking about the time that would save, if you send out 1,000 robocalls or whatever you want to call them, and you got 12 leads, then all of a sudden, you know what? That's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, and things are changing so fast.
So fast.
It's hard actually keeping on top of it. And that
Right.
goes to your point. If you're spending 20 hours trying to learn AI, the outcome, the ROI on
Correct.
that, or even the return on time, I suppose, needs to be high enough that it justifies that. Otherwise, you're better off just old school business model, pick up the phone, call, and try and do a deal.
Well, it also goes back to something that you've heard me talk about for many years, and I've been talking about it because I was taught it 30 years ago. Do reverse mentoring, find friends. Phil's in his 30s. I'm in my 60s. You know, I don't want to be taught AI by a 70-year-old. It's not going to resonate, even though that 70-year-old might be the expert. Look, Larry Ellison, who's the head of Oracle, is really into AI and in a big way. But, in a certain regard, you got to play to your audience. If if we're training the next generation or trying to convince the current generation that they have to pay attention, you have to also be aware of the optics of that. In a certain regard, I'm the first to say to people, look, this is why I have younger people that I work with. And as you know, I had younger people at NAI all the time that I worked with to give the perspective of what's the next, what's the millennial generation thinking about. And I think those are very important points not to miss as you're looking at any of these things. Who's your audience? And will it resonate with your audience? And the only way you're going to know that is to ask the audience age group those questions and say, and I literally, I mean, I have as I think I have a 35 and a 38-year-old son and daughter. I constantly will send them things and go, does this sound like a professional or does this sound like dad? It literally, and if they go, no, it sounds like dad, then they help me modify it. And so I reach out to some of my old colleagues that are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s and go, does this sound stupid or not? So I think that's very important in knowing your audience. But if you never actually do research on who you're meeting with, you don't even know who the person is. I mean, I can tell you, we used to go to pitches, I'm talking 20 years ago, and I'd say to people in the car, what do we know about the customer? And they go, he called us. I'm like, okay, did we Google him? And no, we didn't. But now this is so much easier to do. But again, a lot of it is how much time is it going to take.
I love the point, and that's such a golden nugget is to know your audience. And I
100%.
think I think that applies in brokerage more than anything else, is that we're all too quick to just think that what we have to say is of interest. And that's social media, that could be given a pitch, that can be talking to a prospect. We think that what we have to say is just inherently interesting when it might fall completely flat. And I think people that fail on social media or fail in pitches are culpable of that, is that that's what they're doing. They're only telling what they want to say, as opposed to saying, who is my audience? Like you said, identify who your audience is and then what resonates with them.
Right.
That in itself, that's a great tip. If you want to be better at pitching, you want to be better at social media, figure out who your audience is and talk to the audience on what they want to hear versus what you think you just want to say.
Well, and on that point, one of the things I do in every one of my consulting arrangements, if it's like on a monthly or a longer term basis, I will not take a consulting assignment that's more than like 1 hour, 2 hours, where I can't physically meet with you. My largest consulting client right now, I meet with them once a month, and they are a 4 hour plane ride and a 2 day hotel stay just to meet with them. And I bake that into it because what you learn in person, what you learn in the car driving from the airport, what you learn having a meal with somebody, and then intertwining it is a whole different aspect to your point of you got to know your audience. And you got to know your audience. Zoom is wonderful, as you and I are doing right now. It's wonderful. It's great. But, in a certain regard, if I want to be an expert in your market, I got to come to be with you at least so often, or my advice will fall shallow. So, and because I have to see it, I have to feel it, I have to see how you react to it. I have to, understand some of the local aspects, whether it can be where we go to get a cup of coffee, what the hotel is like, what the neighborhoods are like. And I think a lot of brokers hide behind their computers, let's just put it that way. And my advice is take 10% of every commission and just put it aside into what I call the travel, entertainment, business development budget. So you can go to the ICSEs, you can go to the SIORs, you can go to your company's events. You can also, more importantly, when a customer calls you from Toronto, and you can say to them, you know what, I'd like to come see you. And I'm sure you can tell me exactly how much the plane ride is to Toronto. And I bet it's less than $300. It's not a lot of money. But people don't do that. They hide behind, well, I have all this stuff. I have all these computers. I have AI now. I don't need to do that. And I think that's another point. And also to your point, teach people how to use it, how they can become more efficient. One of the things in consulting right now is I'm teaching people how they can do things and showing them with the aspect that once I show them, they're not going to need me anymore, but that's okay. That's the value that I'm delivering. They're not going to need me as much. So it's a different mindset, which I think is very important because that's where I see it going. I see people giving people advice to say, you can do it this way. Or as you and I were talking, just copy someone. A lot of it is, I mean, it's not hard. I mean, if you just copy on the personal branding, if you copy some of the best people you think are out there, it's not hard. It's just not hard.
And it's easy to see. That's the best part, is
That's
because
it's really easy. It's instantaneous.
and
Right.
the ones that are the best are popular. So
Correct.
if you want to
Correct.
see someone that's not popular, then and perhaps that's all of us. I started when I had very little traction on anything, and it was just consistently trying to deliver
Right.
a message. But Bob and Ken, like those are two absolute role models for
Absolutely.
anyone that
Yeah.
wants to try
And there
social
are
media.
others. There are many others. And also, if you look in the residential space, I mean, just about every market, social media wise, you can figure out who the top dog is.
Mhm.
Pretty easy.
Yeah, we're coming up. Actually, we're a little
Yeah.
late on time because we had a hard time getting started on
Yeah.
Riverside.
No worries. No worries.
I'm very respectful of your time, and
Yeah.
I appreciate every time we get a chance to talk, and of course this was no different. Any closing remarks you want to have? Obviously, I'll put links to your LinkedIn,
Yeah.
your new website. Any closing comments? Anything that you wanted to cover?
No, the best closing comment I can give everybody is, I'm convinced that people aren't failing, they're stagnating. That's my one of my key words is that they're not moving forward fast enough and they're not really falling behind, but they feel they're behind the curve a little bit. So anything they can do to break through that is really, what I help people with, but people can also kind of try to think about it themselves. Sometimes that's change behavior. Sometimes it's just simple using AI to save those 10 hours that you can use 10 hours to do something else. And no, as always, Chad, I greatly appreciate you reaching out and spending time with you. And I don't know when I'm going to be up your way, but if you get to the East Coast, let's definitely get together. And I wish everyone well.
Yeah, I'd love to do that, and I'm going to keep asking you every time I have an opportunity to chat with you. I always enjoy it, so I'm going to keep asking until you one day tell me no. So,
Oh, no, no, not a problem. I appreciate it, Chad.
well, thanks so much, Jay. I'll make sure to include all those links, and once again,
That'd
just
be great.
thank you a ton for
Thanks.
your time.
Bye bye.
Okay, thanks, Jay.